A whole lot of iniquity is covered under the word deceit. Webster defines deceit as literally catching or ensnaring, and therefore the misleading of a person, the leading of another person to believe what is false or not to believe what is true, and thus to ensnare him. Fraud, fallacy, cheat, any declaration, artifice, or practice which misleads another or causes him to believe what is false. The Greek word doulos means craft, deceit, or guile, used in the New Testament regarding such things. For generations, there have always been a lot of people out there who have wanted to gain advantage by defrauding other people, lying to others to get personal gain, to cheat of others what is theirs, or to make them seem better than they are, swindling from others. And as we can imagine, God is not pleased with these kind of behaviors. So it's good for us to consider them, how we can avoid them, and how we are to live in a contrary way to glorify and honor God. We begin with lying. And again, what is lying? It would seem to be quite simple to understand lying, right? When you're not talking about the truth, when you say something that is not the truth, but it can get complex. Because there are some who suggest that if you are not speaking the whole truth and nothing but the truth all the time, that you're lying. Some people will say you're lying even if you believe that you're telling the truth, but you're honestly mistaken. You have gotten your facts wrong, or you are saying something you're led to believe that is actually not true. Now, lying is telling a falsehood, indeed, and we can say that it is a telling of a falsehood in order to try to exonerate oneself from consequences or to harm other people. That a lot with lies is a lot to do with intent. Is there an intent to deceive, an intent to try to have somebody believe something that is false in order to make you look better or another person to look worse? What's the motivation going on here? It's a very common sin. I mean, why do I always have to go through all the terms and conditions? Why do we need to sign contracts all the time? Why are there lawsuits all the time? It's because our yes and no don't mean anything. In Matthew 5:37, as Christians, our yes should be yes or no, no, and that should be sufficient. But that's not the way it is in the world, because there is so much deceit. There is so much breaking of faith. There are some people who will say yes but then not do it, or things of that nature. Now, there are some people out there who are pathological liars. And a pathological liar is somebody who just constantly lies. They lie all the time. They may not even realize they're lying. They're always lying. They're always kind of trying to make the world seem like what people want them to think the world looks like, right? There may be people in very high positions of power who are doing this on a constant basis, and there's no end of shows about people who do this kind of thing, and it was just so brazen. And even if you hook them up to a lie detector test, they probably would pass it, because there's not maybe that circuit in the brain that realizes, right, that there is a lie being spoken. It just becomes so habitual that it's just second nature at that point. But that is likely the vast, vast minority of cases. Most people are situational liars. And what that means is that most of the time, or a lot of the time, they're going to say things that are true and honest. It's just that when they get caught in a circumstance in which the truth is uncomfortable, the truth would work to their disadvantage, when they want to save face, for any number of reasons, they will instead say something that is untrue to cover themselves in that situation. This is something that we see often with little children, right? That little children will often themselves, right? They'll tell you what you want to hear, not what is actually the situation, right? They will keep lying. If that never really gets addressed, where we just kind of let that slide all the time, because what do they learn from that? They learn that if you constantly just tell people what they want to hear, that it'll go better for them than telling the actual reality of the situation. And also, it's the opposite, right? Children can be very hurt when they discover that the people they have trusted in their lives have actually been telling them falsehoods. And that's something that we also need to be very careful about in how we communicate about things in the world. Sure, there are a lot of times children at very small ages will ask very big questions. And we know that they really don't have the capacity to understand. And so, yet we can still find ways of communicating to them in age-appropriate ways to try to communicate something about the situation, something that they realize that is beyond them at that point. and that to maintain a little bit level of trust about these things, and they can be explained later without resorting to outright lies and outright distortion. Maybe you can still remember some trusted person who told you something because it just was easier for them, or because they didn't know what to say at the moment, and that when you found out that they had been actively deceiving you about it, it didn't sit well with you. And that's why there's that kind of concern and that kind of problem. We also see, of course, we think about lying, we can think about it in the big terms, right? Where politicians always lie, right? Where even if they're not, when they're speaking something close to the truth, there's normally some kind of angle in what they're saying, and why we generally tend to be, or should be, skeptical about a lot of people in power and prominence in general, some of the things that they have to say. We can think about people who lie because they're getting in trouble with the law, or because it works for them in terms of business deals, or in order to gain some kind of advantage. But, it's easy to look at those kind of higher level ones, things that we may not ourselves be in a position to do, and look at that as lying. But there's also plenty of lies that we might be involved in. Of course, there's the white lie, right? Where we will try to tell somebody that they look great when they don't look great. Or perhaps the greatest white lie of all: how are you doing today? I'm doing fine, or I'm good. When we're not good, right? And we're not fine. And so there's a whole lot going into that, though, right? Because there's also the fact that we're not necessarily trying to actively lie as much as we understand it's a social convention that basically, hi, how are you today? Good. How are you doing? I'm doing good. That whole conversation is really just a salutation. It's an acknowledgement of one another and your presence. That's basically like a greeting. And you know that because if you actually break that and actually say, well, I'm not doing too good, this is going on, that's going on, that you can tell there's kind of the social violation, that was not the information being requested, right? Sometimes the way that we communicate, we're really asking people, please just tell us the platitude that we can move on. Because communication is much more multi-layered than just the very simplistic way we can often make it. And so that's why we use that kind of nuance to some of the time in the way that we navigate some of these things when it comes to the way that we communicate to one another. But we should try to find ways of communicating where we can continue with the platitude, but not necessarily lie. Like, you know what, I'm all right. Or, can't complain, what some way that can be, maybe it's not the greatest, but I know you don't want me to go into it right now, right? And of course, there's the way we lie to ourselves, right? Sometimes we lie to ourselves, or lie to other people by pretending that we got everything put together, that we've got everything sorted, that we are so holy when we are not, right? That the danger James talks about of the man who looks himself in a mirror and then forgets what he looks like when he walks away, the one who hears and does not do. The hypocrite that Jesus warns about, the Pharisees, hear what they say but don't do what they say. Don't do what they do, because what they say and what they do, very different things. And there are lots of ways we kind of put on a face and pretend that we are somebody we're not. And in some way, that's kind of deceiving ourselves in an attempt to deceive others. And we need to be very careful about that kind of presentation, right? And of course, at the extreme, we have people who do that for a living, right? Confidence men, con men. And you can even argue that undercover police officers are living a lie and are living in deceitful ways in order to accomplish the professions that they have. And there's good conversation to be had. Can you really glorify and honor Christ in that kind of role? When your whole life and everything you're doing is really telling a lie. And see, God is not a fan of this kind of thing and has consistently condemned it. That lying really undercuts everything Christians should stand for, and that's the main issue. That for stewards, it's to be faithful in 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 2. That's the real thing. And we're to be stewards of the truth of God. And it's a solemn responsibility. Because if people know us, and they know that we're not telling the truth in basic matters, they have no confidence in what we say about Jesus, right? If I'm willing to lie and distort what is true in order to gain some small advantage in life, you're not going to really believe me if I want to tell you about greater things, right? That we need to have that kind of trustworthiness, that we are people who are known to be honest. That no lie is of the truth in 1 John 2:21, and Satan's the father of lies in John 8:44. That lying is really the work of the evil one. And trying to distort, manipulate the truth for our own purposes, that's the work of the devil. And I know there are a lot of people who are trying to justify the end justifies the means, that if there's a great result, then we shouldn't question as much how we got there. But that's not the way it works with Jesus, right? Part of the whole thing is the means. God has saved us through Jesus. And Jesus didn't go around lying and cheating and distorting the truth for his purposes. Jesus is the truth. and that we need to live in that way. Lies may seem insignificant to us, but they're significant to God because it's part of what is evil, satanic, and wrong. We should have no part of it. Now, sure, we can get into some of the examples of Scripture. Well, what about Rahab lying about where the spies went? What about God himself, right? In the story in 1 Kings 22 with Micaiah ben Imlah and the lying words that are going to the prophets. And yeah, these examples exist. And we can get into them. But what we should note there is God has his sovereign purposes in those things. And we can see that maybe, especially when it came to Rahab, there might be situations which we find ourselves that we're hiding people who some authorities want to kill and they knock on our door, that maybe we do some creative misdirection of the authorities because we are privileging the higher loyalty to trying to preserve life than to prove honest with authorities who are trying to do harm. And to be willing to stand before God based on those things. But if you notice, those are not the situations that we're going to find in any given day. And the intent there of deception is perhaps more noble, or according to God's purposes, in ways that when it comes to our day-to-day life, we need to be much more careful about it and not trying to find ways of justifying, commending, distortion, lying, or any kind of warping of the truth. That we need to do all we can to speak truth and to be known as true and honest. Sometimes we're better that we don't provide our opinion, right? We don't have to say everything that ever comes to our minds. We don't have to be blunt, and we don't have to be completely out there in everything that we say. There is a way in which we say, and for good reason, that the discretion is a better part of valor. But that we can still be honest people, and that we're known as being trustworthy, because that's what's really important, isn't it? If people can't trust us, why should they listen to us when we would tell them about Jesus? Another aspect of deceit is cheating. What? Cheating is to deceive and defraud in a bargain, to deceive for the purpose of gain in selling, deceive in any artifice, trick, or device with a view to gain an advantage contrary to common honesty. According to Webster's. And we see this in a couple of main applications. We see it a lot in commerce, right? To defraud in order to find some way to get more money than we deserve out of a given circumstance. In the ancient world, we see this frequently as a concern on improper weights, right? Where the weight doesn't actually meet the appropriate standards. Well, even to this day, you see there's that sticker at the gas pump or on the produce weights and at the grocery store checkout, because the government is supposed to certify that the weights are accurate, right? That if it says it's 2.73 ounces of a certain kind of vegetable, that's how much it really is. That it's not a heavier weight to pretend that it's more than it really is, or that when you're pumping gas that you're really getting a full gallon of gas for the price on the screen. And that's where deceitful balances would exist, where the balance is, the weight was a little lighter than it was supposed to be, so that it would deceive people, right? Or you don't want to have lying weights. You want to have honest balances, so that you're not cheating or defrauding. And of course, that's even imagining that something's even being given. There's plenty of schemes out there where people are trying to take money away from people by cheating, by defrauding. Identity theft, for instance, would be a form. Of course, that's kind of maybe up to the level of swindling that we'll get to in a moment. And of course, another problem that's cheating is in the realm of honesty, right? To appropriate answers and materials that are others and pass them off as your own, which we talk about is in terms of plagiarism, cheating. This has especially become big with the advent of AI and ChatGPT, where plenty of people are trying to pass off what the AI came up with as their own material. And that will still continue to be a problem. And it's a sin that we see often, right? And it starts young, where children are inclined to use the answers of another as opposed to building their own, or to deal with the shame or suffering of being wrong, right? And the consequences that come with that. And a lot of times people learn that there's a benefit to plagiarizing and cheating, at least a short-term benefit that they seem to get, and they will continue to do that kind of thing. Jesus will talk about how the sons of the world live by cheating in Luke 16:1-8. And people do gain money, right? There are a lot of ways cheating people is very lucrative. And sometimes they get caught and suffer some consequences, but especially here in America, the consequences are normally disproportionately light compared to what they've actually done. And so that's why a lot of people make a good living preying on other people. And unfortunately, there are some people who have done such a good job of it and put it in such terms that it's not even illegal. There are a lot of ways people deceive other people in ways that are completely legal and above board legally, but they will not be so justified by God. And again, as we saw, God does not appreciate unjust weights. He condemned Israel when they used false weights in Amos 8:5. It's interesting that with the rich young ruler in Mark chapter 10, the Markan version, among the commandments Jesus has, do not defraud, as that's one of the things that you're not supposed to be doing. And in Corinth, one of the things that Paul was very bitterly lamenting was how Christians were defrauding each other. They were cheating each other. And that was just so shameful in his opinion. Why would you cheat your fellow people of God? And that's why we shouldn't defraud each other, but be honest in our dealings. And swindling, again, we talked a little bit a minute ago, is cheating taken to the next degree, right? It's kind of cheating, defrauding grossly with deliberate artifice. And we talk about identity theft, right? It's a big one where people go out and get all kind of credit cards and they go buy a bunch of things and you're left to deal with the consequences of it. Pyramid schemes, right? Ponzi schemes, fraudulent companies that are developed, or get-rich-quick schemes, and especially in church context, multi-level marketing schemes have become incredibly big and can absolutely become a form of swindling. A lot of people are going to howl and protest saying that they're legitimate businesses. Well, if the business it involves your work and that you are paid for things that you're selling and the work that you're investing in other people, that's one thing. But if you are making your money because other people are working hard and you're getting the fruits from all that, but they're not, that they're putting in all the work and not getting well remunerated for that, then that is swindling. That is cheating your fellow Christians, and God's not going to look kindly upon that kind of behavior. Those who do that kind of thing are condemned of any kind of swindler, condemned 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 10. And in fact, in 1 Corinthians 5, among those really serious sins where Paul says, if there's a Christian out there who's so-called Christian who's committing sexual immorality or idolatry or is a drunkard or a swindler, have nothing to do with such a one, not even eat with such a one, Paul says. Very strong language about that. We should have no part in any of it. Now, all of these are about deception, deceiving others for personal gain. And it seems advantageous to a person for a moment, either because they save their reputation, they'll make some money, but it violates God's principles. Would we want to be cheated, lied to, or swindled? In fact, so many times it's kind of a double burden when you're in that situation, because for some reason we got this perverse thing in the world where we seem to try to judge people who have been swindled as if it's their fault. And so they, even if we're not doing that, they feel that they feel doubly terrible, not just that they've suffered the loss, but that they were taken in by it. When in fact, the entire time, we should never have anyone be made to feel sorry that they trusted somebody. Yes, we need to be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. In Luke 16, that we need to be aware that there will be people who will try to deceive us and that we need to use appropriate wisdom and discretion. But we should never be ashamed of ourselves because we trusted people. Because in the end, all that we have is really based on our trust in God, and we're only going to make it if we are able to trust in one another and to work together to glorify God, to relate, to become one with God and with one another as God is one within himself. And we are not to That's why in Colossians 3, 9 through 10, we have to lie to one another, because we've taken off the old ways of the world and we put on the ways of Christ. And therefore, there's no excuse or justification for deceiving for the benefit of ourselves or the harm of others, no matter how insignificant, innocent, or harmless we might think that deception might prove to be. Yes, because in the world, deception's all over the place. We should assume that people are trying to deceive us, pretty much. We should definitely assume that politicians and those who have very powerful interests in our country are trying to deceive us. And they're not going to be fully forthright and honest with situations. What they're doing, the way their opponents are acting, or what they would like to do is going to actually change and do for us. There's a lot of lying and cheating and swindling going on. We should have no part of it. We should not be commending it. We should not be justifying it. We should be the people of God who are of the truth, not of falsehood, so that we can do what is pleasing to God. We're so glad you joined us. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts on our forms of deceit, of lying, cheating, swindling, things of that nature, love to hear your comments. Let us know in the comments. I'm Ethan with Adventist Church of Christ, Los Angeles, California. We'd love to be of encouragement service to you. Can we pray for you? Would you like to study the Bible with us or take a Bible correspondence course? Would you like to meet with us or something else we can do for you? Please let us know. Reach out to us at AdventistChurchOfChrist.org. You can also find us on social media, Adventist Church of Christ, in many places. We again thank you. May the Lord bless and keep you, make his face shine upon you until we're able to meet again.